The letter trembled in my hands, its crisp white paper a stark contrast to the dark mahogany desk where I found it. "Dear Emily," it began in Ryan's hasty scrawl, so different from his usual meticulous handwriting. My husband of 12 years had chosen the coward's way out, leaving nothing but ink on paper to end our life together. But he couldn't have known about the weathered safe hidden in my grandmother's study, or the legacy that would turn his smug smile into something far less confident. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The autumn rain pelted against the windows of our Riverside Heights home as I read the letter for the 4th time, still struggling to process the words that had shattered my world just hours before. The constant tick of the grandfather clock in our foyer, a wedding gift from Ryan's parents, seemed to mock each passing second of this nightmare. "I need to move on," his words burned into my mind. "Rebecca can give me the life I've always wanted. I'm sorry, Emily, but we both know you were never meant for the world I aspire to be part of. Rebecca Palmer." The name alone made my stomach churn. The new CEO of Palmer Technologies, who had swept into town 6 months ago with her perfect blonde hair, designer wardrobe, and apparent interest in my husband's small but promising architecture firm. I'd noticed the changes in Ryan gradually. Late nights at the office, sudden business trips, a new cologne I didn't recognize. But I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. The sound of tires on wet gravel snapped me from my daze. Through the rain-streaked window, I watched my best friend Madison's red SUV pull into the circular driveway. I hadn't called her. I hadn't called anyone, but small towns like Millbrook had a way of spreading news faster than wildfire. "Emily!" Madison's voice echoed through the foyer as she let herself in with the spare key she'd had for years. "Emily, where are you?" I couldn't find my voice, but she found me anyway, still sitting in Ryan's home office. No, our home office, surrounded by the evidence of our shared life. The architectural awards on the walls, the framed photo of us breaking ground on our first major project together, my marketing degree hanging beside his architecture license. Everything we'd built together over the past 12 years, reduced to nothing by a single letter. Madison took one look at me and the paper in my hands, and her usual cheerful expression hardened. "That lying, cheating bastard," she hissed, pulling me into a fierce hug. "Tessa from the country club called me. She saw them together at the Reserve last night, celebrating." The Reserve, the most exclusive restaurant in 3 counties, where Ryan had claimed he could never get a reservation when I suggested it for our anniversary last month. My laugh sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Celebrating what?" I managed to ask, though I already knew the answer would hurt. Rebecca Palmer just announced her company's plans to develop the old Harrison estate into luxury condos. And guess who she named as the project's lead architect? Madison's voice dripped with controlled fury. The Harrison Estate Development, the project Ryan had been pursuing for months, convinced it would put his firm on the national map. Now I understood why he'd been so confident about landing it, despite going up against larger, more established firms. "He used me," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. All those dinner parties I hosted for potential clients, all the connections I helped him make through my family's name in this town, I was just a stepping stone. Madison's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it briefly before her eyes widened. There's more. Rebecca just posted." She hesitated. "Show me." The image on her phone showed Rebecca and Ryan in the Reserve's private dining room, her massive diamond ring prominently displayed as she kissed his cheek. The caption read, "When you find your soulmate in the most unexpected place. Sorry not. Sorry. True. Love. Power couple. When you know you know." The timestamp was from 3 hours before I found the letter. "I think I'm going to be sick," I muttered, but instead of nausea, an unfamiliar anger began to burn in my chest. This woman, who'd known nothing of our struggles building Ryan's firm from the ground up, who hadn't been there during the lean years when we lived on ramen noodles and dreams, had swooped in and bought herself my husband with promises of wealth. And status. I should have seen it coming, I said, standing up suddenly. The way he changed after she came to town. The new suits, the social media makeover, the sudden interest in country club memberships. This isn't your fault, Madison insisted, but I was barely listening. My eyes had landed on the antique desk, my grandmother Eleanor's desk, that I'd insisted on keeping when Ryan wanted to replace it with something more modern and professional. Grandmother. Eleanor. The thought of her sparked something in my memory. Mads, I said slowly. Help me move this desk. What? Why? Because my grandmother was the shrewdest woman I've ever known, and she never did anything without a reason. I ran my fingers along the ornate carvings on the desk's side, remembering the last time I'd seen her alive, 3 years ago. She'd insisted I take this desk, specifically this one from her study. There's more to life than meets the eye, she'd said with that knowing smile of hers. Remember that, dear heart. Together, Madison and I pushed the heavy desk away from the wall, revealing a section of paneling that looked slightly different from the rest. My heart began to race as I pressed against it, feeling for any irregularity. Click, a small compartment popped open, revealing a sealed envelope and a key that looked far older than I was. The envelope bore my name in my grandmother's elegant script, dated just weeks before her death. My dearest Emily, I read aloud, my hands shaking. If you're reading this, you've finally found yourself in dire enough circumstances to really look at that old desk. Good. There's always been more to our family's legacy than your father chose to share with you. Madison leaned closer as I continued reading, her gasp matching my own as the true scope of my grandmother's secret came into focus. The key, it turned out, belonged to a private vault at First Metropolitan Bank, a vault that hadn't been opened since my grandmother's passing. Call your car service, I said to Madison, surprising myself with how steady my voice had become. We need to get to the bank before it closes. As we drove through the rain-slicked streets of Millbrook, I thought about Ryan and Rebecca celebrating at the reserve, so certain of their bright future together. They had no idea that Eleanor Richmond, my seemingly quiet grandmother, had been the silent majority shareholder in half the development properties in 3 states, including, if my suspicions were correct, the very Harrison estate they were so eagerly planning to develop. The rain began to ease as we pulled up to First Metropolitan Bank, and I felt the first real smile of the day curl at my lips. Ryan had always said I was too content with our comfortable but modest life, too unwilling to play the games needed to move in high society circles. He was about to learn just how wrong he'd been about that, and so much more. The bank manager, Mr. Harrison, no relation to the estate, was already heading out for the day when we arrived, but one look at the key in my hand made him pause. Miss Richmond, he said, recognition flickering in his eyes. We've been wondering when you'd come. As he led us down to the vault level, I thought about Ryan's letter, still tucked in my pocket. You were never meant for the world I aspire to be part of, he'd written. I was about to show him exactly which world I was meant for, and it was far bigger than anything Rebecca Palmer could offer him. The vault door opened with a heavy click, revealing stacks of documents, stock certificates, and a letter addressed to me in my grandmother's handwriting. For when you're ready to show them who you really are. My fingers trembled as I broke the wax seal on the envelope. Inside, I found pages of meticulous documentation, each one revealing another layer of my grandmother's carefully constructed empire. Property deeds, offshore accounts, controlling, interests in development companies across the eastern seaboard, all of it hidden behind shell corporations and trust funds. Your father never understood the value of patience, my grandmother's letter continued. He wanted quick profits, flashy investments. But true power, my dear, grows in the shadows. I've spent decades building this legacy, waiting for someone worthy to inherit it. Someone who understands that real strength isn't about flaunting wealth. It's about knowing when to reveal it. Madison peered over my shoulder at a document listing property holdings. "Emily," she whispered, "these numbers, they're in the billions," Mr. Harrison confirmed, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Mrs. Richmond was quite strategic in her investments. The Harrison estate development, for instance. She purchased that land through a holding company 20 years ago for a fraction of its current value. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. The same development Rebecca Palmer just announced? I pulled out my phone, opening the property records database I had access to through my marketing work. The one she's claiming will establish Palmer Technologies as the dominant force in luxury real estate? Mr. Harrison's smile held a touch of satisfaction. Ms. Palmer's company may have announced their plans, but they don't actually own the property yet. The holding company, your holding company now, has been deliberately stalling the sale, negotiations. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. The implications hit me like a tidal wave. Ryan had hitched his wagon to Rebecca Palmer, thinking she held all the cards. But my grandmother had been playing a much longer game. "Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I'd like to schedule a meeting with the Board of Richmond Holdings first thing tomorrow morning." He nodded, already reaching for his phone. "Of course, Miss Richmond, though you should know. There's something else your grandmother left for you." He moved to a smaller safe within the vault, entering a complex combination. She was quite specific about the timing of this. The safe door swung open to reveal a single USB drive and another note in my grandmother's handwriting. "For when the wolves think they've cornered a sheep." My phone buzzed again, another Instagram post from Rebecca Palmer. "Big plans revealed. Can't wait to transform Millbrook with Ryan Anderson, architect by my side. Power moves, new beginnings. Emily." Madison touched my arm, concern evident in her voice. "What are you thinking?" I held up the USB drive, remembering all the times my grandmother had taught me chess as a child. "Always let your opponent think they're winning," she'd say, until the moment they realize they've played right into your trap. "I'm thinking it's time for a little family reunion," I replied, tucking the drive into my purse. "Would you mind calling Tessa back? Ask her if the reserve has any private rooms available for tomorrow night. I believe I'd like to congratulate the happy couple properly." As we left the bank, the setting sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across Millbrook's historic downtown. Somewhere across town, Ryan and Rebecca were probably still celebrating, convinced they'd written me out of their story. They had no idea they were only in the prologue of mine. Back in my car, I pulled out my grandmother's letter again, focusing on a paragraph I'd skimmed earlier. "Remember, Emily, revenge isn't about destruction. It's about reconstruction, building something so magnificent from the ashes that your enemies are forced to watch your rise from the ruins they thought they'd left you in." Madison was already on the phone with her contacts, but she paused to look at me. "The reserve is booked solid for the next month," she reported. "Apparently, Rebecca Palmer has some sort of standing reservation for their best private room." "Perfect." I smiled, opening my laptop to access the inherited company files. "Call them back. Tell them Miss Richmond would like to exercise her ownership." "Privileges." "Ownership?" Madison's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "The reserve is part of the Richmond Hotel Group," I explained, scanning through the portfolio. "Has been for the past 15 years, along with about 60% of the exclusive establishments Rebecca's been flaunting her new relationship in." My phone lit up with another text from Ryan, the first direct contact since his letter. "Emily, we should talk about the divorce settlement. I know this is hard, but I hope we can keep things civil." Civil. As if there was anything civil about abandoning our marriage through a letter, about flaunting his affair on social media before I'd even discovered his goodbye note. About trying to build his new life with the very properties my grandmother had spent decades acquiring. "Mads," I said quietly, "remember when we were in college and you said I was too nice for the business world?" She snorted. "I remember you, proving me wrong by turning your father's failing marketing firm into the go-to agency for luxury real estate while maintaining a perfect GPA. That was just practice." I opened my grandmother's master portfolio spreadsheet, my marketing mind, already identifying patterns and opportunities. The real lesson starts tomorrow. The office building that housed Ryan's architecture firm cast a long shadow over Main Street. I'd helped him lease it 5 years ago, using my family connections to get him a prime location at a fraction of the market rate. Now, scanning through property records, I realized why the deal had been so sweet. The building was part of my grandmother's portfolio, too. "Call Arthur Jenkins at the property management company," I instructed Madison. "Tell him Miss Richmond needs an urgent review of all tenant contracts, particularly any involving recent changes in business partnerships or ownership structures." Tomorrow, Ryan would discover that his new position as lead architect for Palmer Technologies violated several clauses in his lease agreement. By the end of the week, he'd learn that his attempts to merge his firm with Palmer's development division had triggered acceleration clauses in his business loans held by subsidiaries of Richmond Holdings. But tonight, I had a dinner reservation to plan. Dawn painted Millbrook's skyline in shades of gold as I sat in my grandmother Eleanor's study, surrounded by the contents of the USB drive. My eyes burned from hours of reviewing documents, but each revelation made sleep impossible. The Richmond Empire wasn't just vast, it was meticulously engineered to remain invisible until the perfect moment. My laptop screen displayed an email from Arthur Jenkins, the property manager. "Lease violation notices prepared as requested, Miss Richmond. Shall we proceed with delivery this morning?" A message from the reserve's manager followed. "Private dining room confirmed for this evening. Chef Marcus sends his regards and remembers your grandmother's preference for the 1982 Bordeaux. We've kept several bottles in reserve, per her instructions." My grandmother's chess lessons echoed in my memory. The key to victory isn't just having powerful pieces, it's understanding the entire board. Now, scanning through decades of business records, I finally grasped the true meaning of those words. The sharp trill of my phone interrupted my thoughts. Diana Wheeler, my father's sister and the family gossip queen. Of course she'd be calling. "Emily, darling." Her voice dripped with artificial sympathy. "I just heard about Ryan and that woman. How perfectly dreadful." I switched the phone to speaker, continuing to scroll through financial records. "Hello, Aunt Diana. We're all just devastated for you. Though, between us, your father always said Ryan had social climbing tendencies. Not that anyone listened." She paused dramatically. "Have you considered what you'll do now? The country club dues alone must be—" "Actually," I interrupted smoothly, "I have some meetings to prepare for. The board of Richmond Holdings convenes in 2 hours." The silence on the other end was satisfying. "Richmond Holdings?" Diana's voice had lost its condescending edge. "But that's impossible. Eleanor's company was dissolved years ago. Your father said—" "I'm sure he did." I closed the laptop. "Give Uncle Charlie my best. And Diana, you might want to review the ownership structure of your summer house in Newport. The paperwork should arrive today." Ending the call, I turned to find Madison in the doorway, holding 2 coffee cups and wearing the same clothes from yesterday. She hadn't left my side since the discovery at the bank. "Your aunt's Newport house?" She handed me a cup, arching an eyebrow. "Purchased through a Richmond Holdings subsidiary when they were facing bankruptcy in '98. They've been renting it from one of grandmother's shell corporations ever since." I took a sip of coffee. "Though I doubt they've mentioned that to their society friends." Madison settled into the leather armchair by the window. You know Diana will call everyone in her contact list now. Counting on it. I pulled up the next document. The more people talking, the better. Especially since Rebecca Palmer's making her big announcement at the Chamber of Commerce lunch today. The Harrison Estate project? Madison scrolled through her phone. It's all over social media. Ryan's doing interviews about his innovative vision for the development. I projected my laptop screen onto the study's wall display, revealing a complex web of property holdings and corporate structures. At the center sat the Harrison Estate, its ownership obscured by layers of legal entities. My grandmother didn't just buy that land, I explained, highlighting connection points. She acquired every strategic property around it: access roads, utility corridors, even the historic buildings that affect zoning regulations. Palmer Technologies can announce anything they want, but without these pieces... Understanding dawned on Madison's face. They can't build a thing. More than that. I pulled up another document. Every time they've announced a revolutionary new project in the past 5 years, they've used it to attract investors and drive up their stock price, but they haven't actually completed a major development since Rebecca took over from her father. Madison's brow furrowed. Why not? Because she's been selling off company assets to maintain their luxury lifestyle and public image. Palmer Technologies is practically hollow. All flash, no substance. Just like its CEO. A notification popped up on my screen. An email from James Sullivan, my grandmother's longtime attorney. Miss Richmond, the board members are assembling early. Something you should see before the official meeting. Time to get dressed. I stood, stretching muscles stiff from hours of research. The black Chanel suit, I think. Eleanor's favorite. Madison nodded approvingly. But what about dinner tonight? You'll need something more impactful? I moved to the walk-in closet, pushing past Ryan's empty hangers to the back section. There, in a garment bag I'd never opened, hung a red Valentino dress with the price tag still attached. A note in my grandmother's handwriting was pinned to the sleeve. For when you're ready to wear your power, not just possess it. The law. Offices of Sullivan & Wright occupied the top floor of Millbrook's oldest commercial building, another Richmond Holdings property, I'd discovered. The conference room buzzed with quiet conversation as I entered, 12 board members turning to stare. Gentlemen, I nodded, taking my grandmother's seat at the head of the table. I believe we have matters to discuss. James Sullivan, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, stood. Before we begin, there's been a development. Ms. Palmer's representatives have made an offer to purchase controlling interest in Richmond Holdings through a private equity deal. Murmurs rippled through the room. I kept my expression neutral, even as satisfaction bloomed. They'd taken the bait. The offer appears quite generous, Sullivan continued, sliding a document across the table. Though their ability to actually finance such a deal is questionable. Let me guess, I studied the proposal. They're counting on using the Harrison Estate development as collateral? Sullivan's smile was razor thin. Among other properties they don't actually own yet. Miss Palmer seems to have a pattern of counting her assets before they're purchased. I opened my grandmother's portfolio on the conference room's display screen. Gentlemen, I'd like to share my plans for Richmond Holdings. But first, let's discuss how Rebecca Palmer has been playing corporate shell games with her father's legacy, and why that makes her the perfect mark for what comes next. The next hour was a masterclass in strategic revelation. With each document I shared, each connection I unveiled, I watched understanding dawn across the board members' faces. By the time I finished, there was no doubt who controlled the room. 1. More thing, I added, bringing up a final document. The Palmer Technologies Board meets next week to review Rebecca's leadership. I believe several of you hold significant interests in their voting blocks. Nods around the table. Perfect. I closed my laptop. Because at exactly 7 p.m. tonight, Rebecca Palmer is going to discover that her attempt to acquire the Harrison estate was never going to succeed. The only question is, how many of her other plans will unravel in the aftermath? As the board members filed out, Sullivan held back. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said quietly, "though she might warn you about the dangers of pride before victory." "That's why I scheduled dinner at the Reserve," I replied, gathering my things. Sometimes the best victory is letting your opponents destroy themselves while you simply provide the stage. Leaving the law office, I passed the construction site where Palmer Technologies' logo loomed over empty scaffolding. Ryan stood with a group of investors, gesturing animatedly at architectural renderings. He faltered mid-sentence as I walked. "Bye," his confident smile slipping just slightly. I didn't break stride. Back in my car, another email demanded attention. This one from Thomas Crawford, the city's zoning commissioner. "Miss Richmond, your grandmother's annual charity gala for the Millbrook Historical Society is scheduled for next month. As acting chair of Richmond Holdings, will you be continuing the tradition?" A memory surfaced. Eleanor explaining how she'd used these society events to quietly shape the city's development for decades. The Historical Society's preservation requirements had blocked countless aggressive developers while protecting Richmond Holdings' strategic properties. "Schedule a meeting," I typed back. "The gala will proceed as planned, with a few strategic additions to the guest list." Madison texted an update. She'd confirmed Rebecca Palmer had invited half of Millbrook's social circle to tonight's dinner, planning to announce the Harrison estate development to her closest supporters. The perfect audience for what was about to unfold. My next stop was the Millbrook Chronicle's offices, where editor-in-chief Sarah Martinez waited with barely contained excitement. Eleanor had mentored Sarah early in her career, I'd discovered, even financing her journalism degree through a Richmond scholarship fund. The timestamps on these documents, Sarah spread printouts across her desk, prove Palmer Technologies has been misleading investors for years. But why release the story now? Because Rebecca Palmer doesn't just want the Harrison estate, I explained. She wants to erase Millbrook's architectural heritage and replace it with soulless luxury developments. My grandmother spent decades protecting this town's character. I won't let Palmer Technologies destroy that legacy. Sarah's eyes gleamed. The story runs tomorrow morning, though I suspect tonight's dinner will give us plenty to add to the final draft. Leaving the newspaper office, I spotted Ryan's sleek Mercedes parked outside Palmer Technologies' temporary headquarters. A flash of blonde hair in the passenger seat confirmed Rebecca was with him. They were deep in conversation, Rebecca's gestures growing increasingly animated as she jabbed at something on her tablet. My phone buzzed. James Sullivan sending surveillance photos from Palmer Technologies' board meeting earlier that morning. The images showed Rebecca looking significantly less confident than she appeared now, facing down skeptical board members as she tried to explain her aggressive expansion plans. A quick check of financial records revealed why. Palmer Technologies had leveraged itself to the breaking point, using inflated property valuations to secure loans for Rebecca's lavish lifestyle. The Harrison estate development wasn't just about prestige. It was a desperate bid for survival. Grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. The most dangerous opponent is one who's cornered. They'll risk everything on a single throw of the dice. I had one more stop before preparing for dinner. The Millbrook Public Library's archives department held decades of town records, including the original plans for the Harrison estate. The head archivist, Mr. Peters, had worked closely with my grandmother on historical preservation projects. "Miss Richmond," he greeted me warmly, leading me to a research room where documents were waiting. "I pulled everything you requested about the estate's historical covenants." The yellowed pages revealed another layer of Eleanor's foresight. The Harrison estate wasn't just valuable real estate. It sat at the heart of Millbrook's oldest historic district. Any development would require approval from multiple preservation boards, all of which had members who owed their positions to Richmond Holdings' quiet influence. "One more thing," Mr. Peters added, retrieving a bound volume of old photographs. Your grandmother asked me to save these for the right moment. The images showed the Harrison estate in its glory days, when it hosted society events that defined Millbrook's social calendar. In one particularly striking photo, a young Eleanor Richmond stood beside the original Harrison family patriarch, signing the documents that would secretly transfer ownership of the property to her holding company. She always said pictures were worth more than profits, Mr. Peters smiled, especially when they show where the real power in a town lies. As I gathered the materials, my phone lit up with a message from Madison. Rebecca's assistant just called. The reserve to add place settings for the Palmer Technologies board members. She's planning some kind of major announcement. Perfect. Every player was moving exactly where they needed to be. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Millbrook's historic downtown as I headed home to prepare for dinner. Shop owners nodded. Respectfully, word of my inheritance had spread quickly, transforming yesterday's pitying glances into careful deference. In my grandmother's study, I opened a hidden panel she'd shown me years ago, revealing a wall safe I'd never had reason to access before. Inside lay one final letter, dated the day before she died. My dearest Emily, by now you've discovered the extent of our family's influence, and hopefully understood why I kept it hidden for so long. Power that's flaunted is power that's vulnerable. Rebecca Palmer never learned that lesson from her father, just as your own father never learned it from me. But you, my dear one, have always understood the value of patience, of quiet competence over showy ambition. That's why you'll succeed, where they failed. Remember, true victory isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about letting them destroy themselves while believing they're winning. The dress I left you isn't just about looking beautiful. It's armor for the battle ahead. Wear it well, all my love, Eleanor. As I prepared for dinner, each element felt like a piece moving into position. The Valentino dress fit perfectly, its deep red color a statement of confidence rather than vengeance. Eleanor's antique ruby necklace caught the light like drops of blood. A final text from James Sullivan confirmed everything was in place. Documents ready, witnesses prepared, timing coordinated down to the minute. In less than 2 hours, Rebecca Palmer would learn the true cost of underestimating a Richmond woman. Ryan's words from his farewell letter echoed one last time. You were never meant for the world I aspire to be part of. He was right about that. At least. I was meant for something far more significant than the shallow world he and Rebecca inhabited. Tonight would prove just how right my grandmother had been to entrust her legacy to someone who understood the true meaning of power. The sun set over Millbrook as my car pulled up to the reserve. Through the windows, I could see Ryan and Rebecca holding court in the private dining room, champagne already flowing as they celebrated their imagined triumph. Time to show them what real victory looks like. The reserve's maitre d' greeted me, with practiced deference, though I caught the slight widening of his eyes at my transformation. Gone was yesterday's shell-shocked woman. Tonight, Eleanor Richmond's granddaughter commanded attention. Miss Richmond, he bowed slightly. Your guests are excited about your surprise appearance, though Ms. Palmer seemed unsettled when informed of the change in reservation ownership. I'm sure she was. I handed him a small manila envelope. Please ensure these are distributed to each place setting at precisely 7:30. Music and laughter spilled from the private dining room where Rebecca held court. Through the frosted glass, I could make out perhaps 20 figures. Millbrook's social elite, Palmer Technologies board members, and potential investors, all gathered to witness what they thought would be Rebecca's crowning achievement. Madison materialized at my elbow, stunning in emerald silk. Sarah Martinez just texted, "The Chronicle's story is ready to go live the moment you give the signal." Perfect. I checked my grandmother's vintage Cartier watch. Let's make an entrance. The conversation stuttered to a halt as we entered. Rebecca, resplendent in a designer gown that probably cost more than most people's cars, froze mid-gesture. The champagne flute in her perfectly manicured hand trembled slightly. "Emily?" Ryan stood abruptly, his face cycling through confusion, alarm, and forced politeness. "What are you doing in my own establishment?" I smiled, accepting a glass of the 82 Bordeaux from a waiting server. "The reserve has been part of Richmond Holdings for years." "Surely you knew that, darling," murmurs rippled through the assembled guests. Rebecca recovered quickly, her society smile snapping into place. "Emily, what a surprise. We were just discussing the exciting changes coming to Millbrook." "Yes, I heard about your announcement." I moved to the head of the table, my grandmother's preferred seat. "The Harrison Estate development? Quite ambitious." Rebecca's smile tightened. "Ryan's vision for the property is revolutionary. Once the final paperwork clears..." "About that." I nodded to the maitre d', who began distributing the envelopes. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about the property's availability." Ryan opened his envelope first, his architect's eyes scanning the documents inside. I watched the blood drain from his face. "This can't be..." "Oh, but it can." I took a deliberate sip of wine. "You see, the Harrison estate has been under Richmond Holdings control for decades, along with most of the surrounding properties necessary for any major development." Rebecca snatched the papers from Ryan's hands, her composure cracking. "These records are fake. Palmer Technologies has been negotiating the purchase for months." "With a shell company controlled by my grandmother," I confirmed. "She did enjoy testing potential business partners' due diligence. Though I must say, your team's failure to verify basic property records is concerning." One of the Palmer Technologies board members, Charles Blackwood, I recalled from my research, cleared his throat. "Miss Palmer? Is this true?" Rebecca's laugh held an edge of desperation. "It's clearly some kind of manipulation. Emily's just bitter about Ryan choosing me. This will all be sorted out by our legal team." "Your legal team might be a bit busy," Madison interjected smoothly, passing her phone to Mr. Blackwood. "The Chronicle's about to run quite an interesting story about Palmer Technologies' creative accounting practices." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Another board member, Patricia Chen, head of risk management, stood up. "Miss Palmer, we should discuss this privately." "No." Rebecca's champagne sloshed dangerously. "This is my night, my triumph. You can't just waltz in here and what?" I met her gaze steadily. "Reveal that you've been lying to your investors? That Palmer Technologies is leveraged to the breaking point? That you've been selling off company assets to maintain the illusion of success?" Ryan grabbed Rebecca's arm. "Tell me this isn't true." She shrugged him off. "Of course it's not. We have the financing." "Based on property valuations you don't own," I finished. "Would you like me to share the real numbers with your board members? Or should we discuss how you've been using company funds to cover personal expenses?" The room erupted in overlapping conversations. I noticed several guests discreetly checking their stock portfolios on their phones. Patricia Chen was already dialing her lawyer. "You think you're so clever," Rebecca hissed, leaning across the table. "But you're just a small-town nobody who got lucky with an inheritance," I laughed softly. "Oh, Rebecca, do you really think this dinner was about you?" I gestured to the chaos unfolding around us. "Look around. Every person in this room has been carefully chosen. The Palmer Technologies board members who've been questioning your leadership. The investors you've been courting with promises you can't keep. The society photographers who'll document every moment of your downfall." Understanding dawned in her eyes, quickly followed by fear. "You planned this?" "No," I corrected her. "My grandmother planned this. Years ago, when she recognized in you the same ruthless ambition that destroyed your father's legacy. The same hunger for quick success that made you an easy mark." Ryan's face had taken on an ashen quality. "Emily, I didn't know that you hitched your star to a sinking ship." I turned to him. "That's the problem with ambition without insight, darling. You never look past the shiny surface to see the rot underneath." Mr. Blackwood's voice cut through the chaos. "Miss Palmer, consider yourself suspended from duties, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the office in the morning." Rebecca swayed slightly. "You can't. My father built that company, and you've nearly destroyed it." Patricia Chen's tone was ice. "The board will be calling for a full audit." As if on cue, phones around the room began buzzing with news alerts. Sarah Martinez's story had just gone live. Palmer Technologies scandal, CEO's House of Cards revealed. Rebecca lunged for her phone, but her champagne-numbed fingers fumbled. The device clattered to the table, its screen displaying a cascade of incoming messages and plummeting stock alerts. "You've ruined me," she whispered. "No, Rebecca, you did that yourself." I stood, smoothing my dress. "I simply provided the stage for your final performance." The maitre d' appeared at my elbow. "Miss Richmond, Governor Phillips has arrived for his meeting. Shall I show him to your private office?" Several heads snapped up at the governor's name. Another calculated move. Eleanor had been his family's financial advisor for decades. In a moment, I surveyed the wreckage of Rebecca's carefully planned evening. I believe Ms. Palmer and Mr. Anderson were just leaving, though they might want to avoid the front entrance. There seemed to be some reporters gathering. Ryan stepped forward, desperation etched on his face. "Emily, please. We can talk about this." "Can we?" I arched an eyebrow. "Like you talked to me about leaving? Or did you prefer the coward's way out then too?" Madison touched my arm. "The governor's waiting." I nodded, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Rebecca? The lease on your penthouse, the one owned by a Richmond Holdings subsidiary? It's been terminated. You might want to start packing." The sound of breaking glass followed us out, Rebecca's final grasp at dignity shattering like her champagne flute against the wall. In the private office, Madison poured fresh drinks. That was just the beginning. I pulled up the evening's market reports. Palmer Technologies stock was already in freefall. By morning, Rebecca's board will be begging Richmond Holdings to consider a merger. At a steeply discounted price, of course. And Ryan? His firm's merger with Palmer Technologies violated his business loan terms. By tomorrow, he'll be facing a choice: bankruptcy or signing over his company to satisfy his debts. I smiled. To the very holding company he thought he was escaping. Madison shook her head in amazement. "Your grandmother orchestrated all of this?" "She created the framework." I touched the ruby necklace. "But she left the execution to someone who understood that true power isn't about destruction. It's about transformation." Through the window, I watched Ryan and Rebecca slip out the service entrance. Their dreams of social triumph shattered. Tomorrow, Millbrook would wake to a new reality. The quiet Richmond empire emerging from the shadows, while the flashy Palmer Technologies empire crumbled under the weight of its own deception. Eleanor would have appreciated the symmetry. The governor's meeting proved brief, but productive. His upcoming re-election campaign needed significant backing, and Richmond Holdings' influence extended far beyond Millbrook's borders. By the time he left, we'd established an understanding about the future of development projects throughout the state. "Your grandmother always said you'd surpass her," he remarked at the door, though I doubt even she imagined how spectacularly you'd prove her right. Back in the main restaurant, the aftermath of dinner painted an interesting tableau. Most of Palmer Technologies board members huddled in corners, phones pressed to ears as they consulted lawyers and damage control specialists. The society photographers, carefully positioned earlier, had captured every moment of Rebecca's downfall. "Miss Richmond?" The maitre d' approached discreetly. "There's been an incident in the ladies' room." Ms. Palmer appears to be having difficulty accepting the evening's events. I exchanged glances with Madison. Send in security. Escort her out quietly, through the kitchen, away from the photographers. Despite everything, we're not cruel. Speak for yourself, Madison muttered, but I caught her slight nod of approval. My phone buzzed with a message from James Sullivan. Palmer Technologies Board called an emergency session for 7 a.m. They're requesting your presence to discuss acquisition terms. Already? Madison peered at the screen. That was fast. Fear moves faster than greed. I forwarded the message to our financial team. By morning, their stock will have dropped enough to trigger loan covenants. They'll be desperate for a lifeline. The restaurant's sommelier appeared with another bottle of the 82 Bordeaux. Compliments of Mr. Harrison, miss. He said you might need this for what comes next. I smiled, remembering the bank manager's earlier cryptic comments. Did he leave anything else? The sommelier produced a small envelope. Inside, I found a single key and a handwritten note. The lake house is safe. It's time. Madison's eyes widened. The lake house? Your grandmother's summer retreat? The one place Rebecca's investigators never thought to check. I gathered my things. Care for a midnight drive? The lake house sat on 20 acres of prime waterfront property, its Victorian architecture a testament to old money's understated elegance. As we pulled up, motion sensor lights bathed the wraparound porch in soft illumination. I haven't been here since high school, Madison mused, following me inside. Remember those summer parties? When grandmother would mysteriously need to visit friends just as the social season peaked? I led the way to the library. Not so mysterious now. The safe, hidden behind a false panel of antique books, opened with a satisfying click. Inside, we found another USB drive and a thick folder labeled Palmer Industries, Original Acquisition. Your grandmother kept records of Rebecca's father's downfall? Madison asked, helping me spread documents across the library's massive desk. More than records. I scanned the contents. She kept proof that Martin Palmer's original company was built on stolen designs and fraudulent patents. He sold out to Eleanor before anyone could expose the truth. And Rebecca never knew? She was too young then. By the time she took over Palmer Technologies, her father's secrets were buried in shell companies and legal settlements. I held up a particularly damning document. Until now. My phone lit up with a series of rapid messages. Sarah Martinez. Chronicle's website crashed from traffic to the Palmer story. National outlets picking it up. James Sullivan. Rebecca tried accessing offshore accounts. Already frozen. Mr. Harrison. Palmer Technologies bonds downgraded. Trading suspended. Then, a text from an unknown number. You've destroyed everything. Happy now? R. Madison read over my shoulder. Ryan's not taking it well. He's taking it exactly as expected. I pulled up property records on my laptop. Right about now, he's discovering that his architecture firm's intellectual property rights belong to the holding company financing his loans. The same holding company he just betrayed, Madison realized. Grandmother really did think of everything. Almost. Everything. I reached for the 82 Bordeaux. She couldn't have predicted Rebecca's social media meltdown. We watched clips spreading across Twitter. Rebecca, escorted from the reserve, launching into a tirade about conspiracies and betrayal. The hashtag #AcherPalmer Meltdown was trending nationally. What happens tomorrow? Madison accepted a glass of wine. The pieces fall where they're meant to. I opened my grandmother's final file. Palmer Technologies gets absorbed into Richmond Holdings. Ryan's firm is restructured under new management. Rebecca faces federal investigations into securities fraud. And you? I smiled, touching the ruby necklace. I do what Eleanor taught me, build something stronger from the ruins of their ambition. A final message lit up my phone, from Diana. Just heard about Palmer Technologies. The family is reeling. Eleanor would be proud, dear, though perhaps a bit terrified. She should be, I murmured, raising my glass to my grandmother's portrait above the fireplace. You taught me too well. The lake house's antique clock struck midnight as Madison and I finalized plans for the next phase. Beyond the windows, Millbrook's lights twinkled like stars, unaware that tomorrow would bring a seismic shift in the town's power structure. One more thing, Madison said, studying a document. The Harrison estate plans Ryan submitted? They're actually brilliant. Shame they'll never be built. Who says they won't? I pulled up the original property blueprints. We just need an architect who understands the value of preservation over profit. Someone who sees Millbrook's heritage as an asset, not an obstacle. You already have someone in mind. Thomas Wright. I showed her his portfolio. Local firm, impeccable reputation, turned down Rebecca's offers 3 times. And coincidentally, looking for investment to expand. Madison grinned. Nothing about your plans is coincidental. Eleanor's first rule, make your own luck. I closed the lake house. Safely. Tomorrow we start rebuilding. Not just buildings, legacies. The drive back to town was quiet, both of us processing the evening's events. As we passed the reserve, cleanup crews were already erasing evidence of Rebecca's meltdown. By morning, only the stories would remain. And in Millbrook, stories had a way of becoming legends. Ryan's Mercedes still sat in the reserve's parking lot, its owner presumably too shaken to drive. Security cameras would show him sitting there for hours, watching his carefully constructed future crumble like the house of cards it had always been. Tomorrow, he'd learn the true cost of underestimating the power of quiet wealth over flashy ambition. Tomorrow, Rebecca would wake to find her empire gone, her reputation shattered, her dreams of social dominance transformed into cautionary tales. But tonight? Tonight was for celebrating the kind of victory Eleanor had always valued. Most, the one where your opponents never saw the checkmate coming until they'd played exactly the game you'd designed for them. To Eleanor, Madison raised her glass as we arrived home. The grandmaster who taught you to play the long game. No, I corrected her, thinking of the journey ahead. To transformation. Because the best revenge isn't just winning, it's changing. The entire game. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed once, marking the first hour of a new day. Somewhere across town, Rebecca Palmer was facing the ruins of her ambitions. Ryan was confronting the true cost of his betrayal. And I was finally ready to step into the role Eleanor had prepared me for all along. Not just heir to her fortune, but architect of a legacy built on substance rather than shadows. Dawn painted Millbrook's business district in shades of possibility. As James Sullivan's town car pulled up to the Palmer Technologies headquarters, the building's modern glass facade reflected the sunrise, masking the chaos unfolding within its walls. Security guards flanked the entrance, their presence a clear message to the reporters already gathering on the sidewalk. The board's waiting. In the main conference room, Sullivan murmured as we crossed the lobby. They've been here since 5 a.m. trying to contain the damage. The elevator ride to the executive floor provided a moment to study my reflection in the polished steel doors. Eleanor's ruby necklace caught the light, a reminder of the strength I carried. The Armani suit I'd chosen projected exactly the right mix of authority and approachability. Emily, a familiar voice called as the doors opened. Andrea Mitchell, my college roommate turned corporate attorney, strode forward with a leather portfolio. When I saw the news, I caught the first flight from Boston. You're going to need specialized counsel for what comes next. I hugged her briefly, genuine warmth mixing with strategic appreciation. Andrea had made a name for herself handling complex corporate restructurings, exactly the expertise we'd need. Your timing is perfect, I replied as we walked toward the conference room, though I suspect that's not a coincidence. Her smile held a hint of conspiracy. Eleanor contacted me months ago. Said you might need someone who understands both business and loyalty. Inside the conference room, the Palmer Technologies board members looked like survivors of a natural disaster. Patricia Chen's usually immaculate appearance showed signs of a sleepless night. Charles Blackwood's hands trembled slightly as he clutched a coffee cup. "Miss Richmond," Patricia stood. "Thank you for coming. We've reviewed the situation and realized the extent of Rebecca's deception." I settled into the chair at the head of the table, the same position Eleanor had occupied decades ago when dealing with Rebecca's father. "Or are we discussing how to prevent today's market opening from completing your company's collapse?" Andrea smoothly distributed documents to each board member. "Richmond Holdings is prepared to offer a structured acquisition that would protect shareholder value while ensuring operational continuity." "This is highway robbery," Charles sputtered, scanning the terms. "These valuations reflect reality rather than Rebecca's creative accounting," I finished. "Though we could wait for the SEC investigation to establish official numbers, I'm Beau." "Sure your personal liability insurance covers shareholder lawsuits?" The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia Chen cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should focus on immediate stabilization measures." My phone buzzed. A message from Madison. "Ryan's at the bank. Just discovered his accounts are frozen. Perfect timing." "Before we proceed," I addressed the board, "you should know that Ryan Anderson's firm is no longer a viable partner for your development projects. His assets are currently under review for potential fraud charges." Charles. Blackwood's face darkened. "That architectural contract was central to our recovery strategy." "Fortunately," Andrea interjected, "Richmond Holdings has established relationships with several prestigious architectural firms, including Thomas Wright and Associates, who've already expressed interest in the Harrison Estate project." A knock at the door interrupted any response. Sarah Martinez entered, digital recorder in hand. "Sorry to intrude, but I believe you'll want to hear this before it goes live." She played an audio clip. Rebecca's voice, clearly intoxicated, leaving a rambling voicemail for one of her board members. "Think you can betray me? I'll burn it all down before I let that Richmond bitch win. The offshore accounts, the backdated contracts, everything." Patricia Chen closed her eyes in resignation. "When was this?" 2 hours ago, Sarah replied. "She's been calling investors all night, making threats. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit has opened a formal investigation." I stood, smoothing my jacket. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have exactly 30 minutes before the market opens. Richmond Holdings' offer expires when trading begins. I suggest you consider your options carefully." Leaving them to their deliberations, I found Madison waiting in Rebecca's former office. The space screamed new money, all chrome and glass, with modern art pieces chosen more for price than taste. "You should see the social media meltdown," she reported, turning her tablet to show multiple viral videos of Rebecca's public breakdown. Every society event she's scheduled for the next 6 months has quietly uninvited her. Speaking of society, I examined a framed photo on the wall. Rebecca and Ryan at a charity gala, their smiles as artificial as their loyalty. "Has Aunt Diana called yet?" 3 times since breakfast. Apparently the Newport crowd is absolutely buzzing. Some are already trying to claim they never really supported Rebecca's takeover attempts. Andrea joined us, satisfaction evident in her stride. They're signing. Full acquisition, immediate leadership transition, minimal resistance. And the board members? Eager to demonstrate their cooperation with any pending investigations. She smirked. Amazing how quickly loyalty shifts when faced with potential criminal charges. My phone lit up with a series of rapid notifications. James. Sullivan. Merger documents registered. Control transfer complete. Sarah Martinez. Story updating now. Exclusive interview still on for noon? Thomas Wright. Revised Harrison estate plans ready for review, incorporating historical preservation elements as discussed. A final message arrived, from Ryan's private number. Need to talk. Please, can explain everything. Madison read it over my shoulder and snorted. Explain what? How did he thought sleeping with Rebecca would buy him social advancement? More likely, he wants to negotiate his firm's survival. I drafted a quick response to Sullivan. Proceed. With loan acceleration. Let's see how he handles real pressure. Andrea's tablet chimed with breaking news. Palmer Technologies stock suspended from trading. Rebecca's being called before the SEC next week. Perfect timing for the Historical Society's autumn gala, Madison mused. Half of Wall Street attends those things. I smiled, remembering Eleanor's lessons about timing and power plays. Remind me to review the guest list. Some strategic additions might be appropriate. A commotion in the outer office drew our attention. Ryan stood arguing with security, his normally polished appearance showing signs of strain. Behind him, Thomas Wright waited patiently, architectural plans tucked under his arm. Ladies and gentlemen, I addressed the gathering crowd of employees. Please welcome your new head of design and development. Mr. Wright's vision for sustainable, historically conscious architecture will help shape Millbrook's future. The implied message was clear. Ryan's role in that future had been erased. As security escorted him out, I caught his eye. The desperate plea in his expression might have moved me yesterday. But that was before I'd embraced my grandmother's most important lesson. True power lies not in seeking revenge, but in orchestrating transformation. Back in the main conference room, Patricia Chen and the remaining board members awaited further instructions. Their earlier resistance had transformed into eager compliance, survival instincts kicking in as they realized which way the wind was blowing. First order of business, I settled into Rebecca's former chair, is damage control. Andrea will handle the legal transitions. Madison is coordinating media strategy. Mr. Wright's team starts architectural reviews this afternoon. And Rebecca? Charles Blackwood asked nervously, is no longer your concern. I opened my laptop, displaying the day's agenda. Though I hear the FBI is very interested in her recent activities. Andrea distributed updated contracts to the board members. You'll find the terms of your continued employment quite generous. Provided, of course, that full cooperation continues. My phone buzzed with another update from Sullivan. Ryan's firm is officially in default. Ownership reverts to Richmond Holdings by end of business day. One more thing. I addressed the room. The Harrison Estate project will proceed, but with significant modifications. This town's heritage isn't for sale to the highest bidder. As if on cue, Thomas Wright entered with his revised plans. The elegant drawings showed a development that honored Millbrook's architectural history while embracing sustainable future growth. Exactly the vision Eleanor had always championed. Your grandmother would approve, Madison whispered as we studied the designs. She planned for this moment, I replied softly. All of it. The acquisitions, the strategic partnerships, even the timing of Rebecca's downfall. But she left the execution to you. I touched the ruby necklace, feeling its familiar weight. Because she knew sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's taking everything they wanted, Madison finished, and building something better with it. Through the windows, Millbrook's historic downtown stood proudly against the morning sky. Soon, those centuries-old buildings would be protected by new preservation laws, their character maintained while adaptations allowed for thoughtful growth. Rebecca had wanted to tear it all down, replacing history with glass towers and concrete canyons. Ryan had been willing to sacrifice his integrity for a chance at hollow prestige. Instead, they'd become footnotes in a larger story, one about preservation, transformation, and the quiet power of patient strategy, just as Eleanor had planned all along. The afternoon brought a cascade of developments that even Eleanor might not have anticipated. Andrea's legal team discovered irregularities in Palmer Technologies' international contracts, shadow companies, and unauthorized payments that stretched back to Rebecca's early days as CEO. These offshore accounts, Andrea highlighted sections. Of a complex financial report, they're registered to shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. But look at the beneficial ownership structure. I leaned closer, studying the documentation. Martin Palmer's old associates. Rebecca wasn't just mismanaging the company, Andrea confirmed. She was actively funneling money to her father's former business partners, probably buying their silence about the original patent fraud. Madison whistled softly. No wonder she was so desperate to acquire Richmond Holdings. She needed clean assets to cover the holes in her books. A knock at the door interrupted our analysis. Thomas Wright entered with his senior design team, their expressions mixing excitement with determination. Miss Richmond, he spread updated blueprints across the conference table. We've identified something fascinating in the Harrison Estate's original foundation. The architectural drawings revealed hidden structural elements dating back to Millbrook's founding, historical features Rebecca had planned to demolish. These support columns, Wright indicated intricate stonework details. They're part of the Underground Railroad network. The Harrison family helped shelter escaped slaves, hiding them in secret rooms built into the estate's infrastructure. My mind raced with possibilities. So instead of luxury condos, we could restore the historical sections, Wright finished enthusiastically. Create a living museum that honors Millbrook's role in civil rights history. Mixed-use development that preserves and celebrates our heritage. The contrast with Rebecca's vision couldn't have been starker. Where she'd seen only profit potential, we'd uncovered an opportunity to protect something priceless. Draft a full proposal, I instructed. Include educational partnerships with local schools. This isn't just about preserving buildings, it's about preserving stories. As Wright's team departed, Sarah Martinez arrived for our scheduled interview. The Chronicle's headline already dominated local news. Richmond Holdings acquires Palmer Technologies, a new era for Millbrook development. Ready to make this national? Sarah set up her recording equipment. The Wall Street Journal's interested in the corporate governance angle. Forbes wants to profile the generational wealth transfer aspect. Before I could respond, security called up from the lobby. Miss Richmond, Mr. Anderson is back. He's demanding to see you, causing quite a scene. My phone buzzed with another update from Sullivan. Ryan's firm is officially in default. Ownership reverts to Richmond Holdings by end of business day. One more thing, I addressed the room. The Harrison Estate project will proceed, but with significant modifications. This town's heritage isn't for sale to the highest bidder. As if on cue, Thomas Wright entered with his revised plans. The elegant drawings showed a development that honored Millbrook's architectural history while embracing sustainable future. Growth, exactly the vision Eleanor had always championed. Your grandmother would approve, Madison whispered as we studied the designs. She planned for this moment, I replied softly. All of it. The acquisitions, the strategic partnerships, even the timing of Rebecca's downfall. But she left the execution to you. I touched the ruby necklace, feeling its familiar weight. Because she knew sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's taking everything they wanted, Madison finished, and building something better with it. Through the windows, Millbrook's historic downtown stood proudly against the morning sky. Soon, those centuries-old buildings would be protected by new preservation laws, their character maintained while adaptations allowed for thoughtful growth. Rebecca had wanted to tear it all down, replacing history with glass towers and concrete canyons. Ryan had been willing to sacrifice his integrity for a chance at hollow prestige. Instead, they'd become footnotes in a larger story, one about preservation, transformation, and the quiet power of patient strategy. Just as Eleanor had planned all along. The afternoon brought a cascade of developments that even Eleanor might not have anticipated. Andrea's legal team discovered irregularities in Palmer Technologies' international contracts. shadow companies and unauthorized payments that stretched back to Rebecca's early days as CEO. These offshore accounts, Andrea highlighted sections of a complex financial report, they're registered to shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. But look at the beneficial ownership structure. I leaned closer, studying the documentation. Martin Palmer's old associates. Rebecca wasn't just mismanaging the company, Andrea confirmed. She was actively funneling money to her father's former business partners, probably buying their silence about the original patent fraud. Madison whistled softly. No wonder she was so desperate to acquire Richmond Holdings. She needed clean assets to cover the holes in her books. A knock at the door interrupted our analysis. Thomas Wright entered with his senior design team, their expressions mixing excitement with determination. Miss Richmond, he spread updated blueprints across the conference table. We've identified something fascinating in the Harrison Estate's original foundation. The architectural drawings revealed hidden structural elements dating back to Millbrook's founding, historical features Rebecca had planned to demolish. These support columns, Wright indicated intricate stonework details. They're part of the Underground Railroad network. The Harrison family helped shelter escaped slaves, hiding them in secret rooms built into the estate's infrastructure. My mind raced with possibilities. So, instead of luxury condos, we could restore the historical sections, Wright finished enthusiastically. Create a living museum that honors Millbrook's role in civil rights history. Mixed-use development that preserves and celebrates our heritage. The contrast with Rebecca's vision couldn't have been starker. Where she'd seen only profit potential, we'd uncovered an opportunity to protect something priceless. Draft a full proposal, I instructed. Include educational partnerships with local schools. This isn't just about preserving buildings. It's about preserving stories. As Wright's team departed, Sarah Martinez arrived for our scheduled interview. The Chronicle's headline already dominated local news. Richmond Holdings acquires Palmer Technologies, a new era for Millbrook development. Ready to make this national? Sarah set up her recording equipment. The Wall Street Journal's interested in the corporate governance angle. Forbes wants to profile the generational wealth transfer aspect. Before I could respond, security called up from the lobby. Miss Richmond, Mr. Anderson is back. He's demanding to see you, causing quite a scene. Eleanor taught me to hold some cards in reserve. I touched the ruby necklace. Sometimes the best power play isn't exposing everything at once. It's letting your opponents reveal their true nature through their own choices. Outside, Millbrook's lights twinkled like stars scattered across the darkening landscape. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, integration teams to manage, preservation plans to implement, a community's trust to rebuild. But tonight was for appreciation, not just of victory, but of transformation. Rebecca's empire of deception had crumbled, making way for something authentic and lasting. Ryan's betrayal had opened the door to a greater purpose, and somewhere, I was certain, Eleanor was smiling at how perfectly her lessons in patient strategy had bloomed. The morning after Ryan's desperate display at Palmer Technologies brought an unexpected visitor to my office. Margaret Whitfield, Eleanor's former housekeeper and closest confidant for over 30 years, arrived unannounced, carrying a weathered leather satchel I'd never seen before. Your grandmother instructed me to wait until the right moment, Margaret explained, her aged hands trembling slightly as she placed the satchel on my desk. She said I'd know it when Rebecca Palmer showed her true colors. Inside the satchel, I found a collection of leather-bound journals spanning decades. Eleanor's elegant handwriting filled thousands of pages with observations, strategies, and secrets that even I hadn't known existed. She kept these hidden in a wall safe behind her dressing room mirror, Margaret continued. Even Mr. Sullivan doesn't know about them. The first journal entry was dated 1975, the year Martin Palmer, Rebecca's father, first attempted to muscle his way into Millbrook's development scene. Eleanor's notation was precise. Young Mr. Palmer mistakes flash for substance. His son, Timothy shows promise, but daughter Rebecca, there's a hunger in her eyes that could prove dangerous or useful, depending on how it's shaped. She was watching them all along, I murmured, scanning through years of carefully documented observations. Madison, who had slipped in during Margaret's explanation, peered over my shoulder. Look at this entry from Rebecca's college years, the Poir. Passage detailed Rebecca's first failed attempt at corporate takeover, a student-run business she'd tried to commandeer through manipulation and false promises. Even then, Eleanor had recognized the pattern that would define Rebecca's career. There's more. Margaret pulled a small key from her pocket. This opens a private storage unit at Millbrook Security and Trust. Eleanor said you'd need its contents when the time came to rebuild what the Palmers tried to destroy. Before we could discuss further, Andrea burst in, waving court documents. You won't believe what the forensic accountants found in Rebecca's personal files. She's been running a complex scheme involving offshore accounts and falsified contracts. I finished holding up one of Eleanor's journals. Dating back to her college years? Andrea blinked. How did you? Because my grandmother never left anything to chance. I turned to a flagged page, including the fact that Rebecca would eventually try to use Ryan to gain control of the Harrison estate. Margaret's eyes crinkled with knowing affection. Eleanor always said you were the only one who truly understood the long game. A text from Sarah Martinez interrupted our discussion. Federal agents just raided Palmer Technologies' satellite offices. Rebecca's executive assistant is cooperating. Need comments ASAP. Tell her to hold off, I instructed Madison. We need to see what's in that storage unit first. The drive to Millbrook Security and Trust took us through the historic district where the Harrison estate stood proudly against the morning sky. Construction crews were already at work, carefully preserving the historical elements Thomas Wright had discovered. Inside the bank's private storage facility, Margaret's key opened a climate-controlled vault that had remained sealed since Eleanor's passing. The contents left us speechless. Original property deeds, architectural plans, and historical documents traced Millbrook's development back to its founding. But more significantly, they revealed how the Palmer family had attempted to erase that history decades ago. These blueprints, Andrea examined faded technical drawings. They show the original Underground Railroad passages throughout the historic district. The Palmers tried to destroy them in the 80s to build a shopping complex, which Eleanor prevented by having the entire area designated as a historical landmark, Madison added, reading from a yellowed newspaper clipping. But the true revelation lay in a series of letters between Martin Palmer and various business associates. The correspondence detailed a systematic attempt to erase Millbrook's architectural heritage, replacing historic buildings with modern developments that would have destroyed the town's character. Eleanor didn't just stop them, I realized, connecting decades of carefully preserved evidence. She turned their own greed against them, using shell companies and holding corporations to slowly gain control of every property they coveted. Margaret nodded. She called it her chess game, letting them think they were winning while she gradually positioned every piece exactly where it needed to be. My phone buzzed with an urgent message from James Sullivan. Rebecca's trying to call an emergency shareholder meeting. Claims to have evidence of illegal activities by Richmond Holdings. Perfect timing, I smiled, lifting a sealed envelope from the vault's contents. Because Eleanor left us something specifically for this moment. The envelope contained notarized affidavits from Martin Palmer's former partners, detailing how he had obtained his initial fortune through fraud and patent theft. More importantly, it showed how Rebecca had continued those illegal practices, using her father's old connections to hide her activities. This is why she was so desperate to gain control of Richmond Holdings, Andrea breathed, scanning the documents. She needed to bury this evidence before it could surface. And now? Madison asked. Now we show Rebecca that her father's mistakes taught Eleanor everything she needed to know about protecting Millbrook from those who value profit over preservation. Back at the office, Thomas Wright waited with updated plans for the Harrison estate restoration. "We've found something remarkable in the original cellar," he announced, spreading detailed drawings across the conference table. A complete map of the Underground Railroad network, hidden behind a false wall. The historical significance was staggering. This wasn't just about preserving architecture. It was about protecting a crucial piece of American history that the Palmers would have carelessly destroyed. "Schedule a press conference," I instructed Madison. "But first, contact the National Historical Society. This discovery changes everything about the development project." A commotion in the outer office drew our attention. Rebecca stood arguing with security, her designer outfit wrinkled and her usual polish noticeably absent. Behind her, federal agents waited patiently, court orders in hand. "You can't do this," she shouted as I approached. "Those records were sealed. My father made." "Sure. Your father made many promises, Rebecca." I held up Eleanor's journals. "But he never understood that true power isn't about destroying history. It's about preserving it for future generations." The federal agents moved forward, warrant at the ready. Rebecca's face crumpled as she realized the full scope of what was happening. This was all a setup? Everything my father worked for was built on lies and fraud, I finished quietly. Eleanor gave you chances to change course, to use your ambition for something meaningful. Instead, you chose to follow your father's path of destruction. As the agents led her away, I noticed Ryan watching from the street below. Our eyes met briefly before he turned and walked away, finally understanding that his betrayal had aligned him with the wrong side of history. Margaret touched my arm gently. "There's one more thing Eleanor wanted you to see." She produced a final journal, its pages filled with architectural sketches and community development plans. Her true vision for Millbrook's future. The drawings showed a harmonious blend of preservation and progress. Historic buildings restored and repurposed, green spaces protected, new developments that complemented rather than destroyed the town's character. "This is what we'll build," I decided, sharing the vision with Thomas Wright's team. Not just buildings, but a legacy of respect for our past while embracing our future. Andrea's tablet chimed with breaking news. Palmer Technologies stock suspended indefinitely. Historic fraud scheme revealed. Madison read over her shoulder. "They're calling it one of the most sophisticated corporate takedowns in recent history." "Eleanor would say it's not about the takedown," Margaret smiled knowingly. "It's about the resurrection that follows." Outside my window, construction crews continued their careful work at the Harrison estate. Each preserved beam and restored foundation tells a story that Rebecca and her father had tried to erase, but Eleanor had seen a bigger picture, one where Millbrook's heritage became its strength rather than its sacrifice. The ruby necklace caught the afternoon light, reminding me that some legacies are built on patience rather than power, on preservation rather than destruction. Today marked not just the end of the Palmer family's influence, but the beginning of something Eleanor had spent decades planning. A future where Millbrook's history would be protected by those who understood its true value. And somewhere in these journals, in these carefully preserved records and meticulously planned strategies, lay the blueprint for that transformation, a chess game decades in the making, with pieces moved so subtly that even the players never realized they were part of a grander design. Rebecca and Ryan had sought quick victories, flashy achievements that would earn them immediate acclaim. But Eleanor had taught me that real change, lasting change, grows from deeper roots. The sun set over Millbrook's historic skyline, its shadows telling stories that would now be preserved for generations to come. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to honor Eleanor's vision. But tonight was for appreciating the intricate web she had woven, a web that had ultimately caught those who thought wealth and ambition were enough to erase history. They never understood that some fortunes are built not on destruction, but on protecting what truly matters. As night fell over Millbrook, The implications of Eleanor's hidden archives continued to unfold. The journals revealed connections that spanned generations, a web of relationships, favors, and carefully cultivated loyalties that had shaped the town's development for decades. "Look at this entry," Madison pointed to a passage from 1992. Eleanor documented every meeting between Martin Palmer and the corrupt city officials he bribed. She even kept photographs. Thomas Wright studied architectural drawings from the same era. These alternative development plans. She created backup strategies for every historic property the Palmers targeted, always finding ways to preserve, while still allowing for growth. A knock at the door interrupted our research. Detective Michael Barnes from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit entered, his expression grave but satisfied. "Miss Richmond, we've finished our preliminary review of the Palmer Technologies servers." He placed a thick file on my desk. "The fraud goes deeper than we initially thought. Rebecca wasn't just hiding her father's crimes, she was expanding them. The evidence was damning. Rebecca had used Palmer Technologies as a front for an international money laundering operation, disguising illegal profits through a maze of construction projects and property deals. She was desperate to acquire Richmond Holdings, Detective Barnes explained, because your grandmother's legitimate business operations would have provided perfect cover for her schemes. Andrea whistled softly, reviewing the FBI's findings. The Harrison estate development wasn't just about prestige. It was going to be their biggest laundering operation yet. Using historical properties as fronts for criminal enterprises, I shook my head. Her father would be proud. Margaret, who had remained quietly observant, reached into Eleanor's satchel and withdrew a final envelope. Speaking of fathers, Eleanor left instructions about when to share this. Inside, we found documentation of an incident from 30 years ago, one that explained Rebecca's desperate need for control and validation. Martin Palmer wasn't her biological father, I read aloud. He adopted her after marrying her mother, but always resented that she wasn't his real daughter. That's why Rebecca worked so hard to prove herself by expanding his corrupt empire. Eleanor knew this whole time? Madison asked. She knew everything. Margaret smiled sadly. Including how that childhood trauma would eventually drive Rebecca to take increasingly desperate risks. My phone lit up with messages from the Historical Society Board. The discovery of the Underground Railroad documents had captured national attention. Preservation experts and civil rights historians were already requesting access to study the Harrison estate's hidden passages. "We should establish a foundation," Thomas Wright suggested, spreading out preliminary plans. "Create a research center focused on architectural preservation and historical documentation. Using Palmer Technologies' seized assets to fund it," Andrea added. "The ultimate irony, their attempts to destroy history will end up preserving it." A text from Sarah Martinez caught my attention. Rebecca's former executive assistant gave a full interview. Story goes live at midnight. She's naming names, including Ryan's role in everything. Speaking of Ryan, security footage showed him packing up his office at his soon-to-be defunct architecture firm. His expression as he removed his framed awards and certificates spoke volumes about lost ambition and misplaced loyalty. "He's agreed to testify against Rebecca," Detective Barnes informed us. "Claims she manipulated him into participating in the fraud schemes." "Did she?" Madison asked skeptically. "No," I replied, reading from Eleanor's journals. "She simply recognized his weakness, the desperate need to be seen as successful, no matter the cost. The same weakness that made him an easy mark for her romantic manipulation." Margaret nodded knowingly. "Eleanor always said the most dangerous people aren't those who commit crimes for money, but those who do it for validation." As if to punctuate her words, breaking news alerts flooded our phones. Rebecca's attempt to flee house arrest had ended in a dramatic confrontation at a private airstrip. Federal agents had intercepted her just moments before her chartered flight. to a non-extradition country was scheduled to depart. She had one last offshore account we hadn't frozen, Detective Barnes explained. Used it to wire payment to a pilot willing to ask no questions. But Eleanor's foresight had anticipated even this. Among her documented evidence was proof that the pilot was actually an undercover agent she'd helped place years ago, specifically to monitor suspicious private flights from Millbrook's airfield. The next morning's Chronicle headline would read, Palmer Empire's final flight, from real estate fraud to failed escape attempt. As our team worked late into the night, processing the vast archive Eleanor had left behind, each revelation added new layers to her masterful strategy. She hadn't just outmaneuvered the Palmers, she'd created a framework for protecting Millbrook's heritage that would outlast any single battle. Your grandmother's vision extended far beyond simple revenge, Thomas Wright observed, reviewing her detailed preservation plans. She was building something sustainable, something that would grow, stronger with each generation. The truth of his words resonated as I studied Eleanor's final journal entry, written just days before her passing. To my dear Emily, you'll find these records when the time is right, when you're ready to understand that true legacy isn't measured in dollars or square footage, but in the stories we choose to preserve and the futures we dare to imagine. A message from James Sullivan interrupted my reflection. Palmer Technologies Board has voted to dissolve the company. They're requesting Richmond Holdings handle the asset distribution. Perfect timing, Andrea smiled. I've drafted proposals to convert their empty office buildings into affordable housing and community spaces. Madison pulled up social media tracking data. Public sentiment is overwhelmingly supportive. People are calling it karmic justice, the company that tried to destroy Millbrook's history being transformed into resources for its future. Outside my window, the Harrison estate stood proudly in the moonlight, its secrets no longer hidden, but celebrated. Construction crews had carefully uncovered more evidence of its role in the Underground Railroad, each discovery adding weight to our preservation efforts. Margaret touched the ruby necklace I wore, Eleanor's favorite piece. She always said jewelry was just metal and stone until it carried a story. Like this town, like these buildings, their true value lies in the tales they tell. As midnight approached, our team began wrapping up the day's discoveries, but one final document caught my attention. A letter Eleanor had written to Rebecca years ago, offering her a chance to change course and use her ambition for positive development. Rebecca had returned it unopened. That was her real failure, Margaret observed. Not the fraud or the crimes, but the inability to see that true success comes from building something meaningful, not just profitable. The contrast between Rebecca's fast-track schemes and Eleanor's patient strategy couldn't have been starker. Where Palmer Technologies had sought quick profits through destruction, Richmond Holdings had spent decades weaving a tapestry of preservation and progress. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: integration plans to implement, historical sites to protect, community trust to rebuild. But Eleanor's archives had given us something more valuable than mere evidence of past crimes. They'd provided a blueprint for transforming Millbrook's future while honoring its past. A vision where development didn't mean destruction, where progress preserved heritage rather than erasing it. And somewhere, in the carefully documented pages of her journals and the meticulously preserved records of her long game, Eleanor had left us the tools to make that vision reality. Ryan and Rebecca had sought to climb the social ladder through shortcuts and schemes. But Eleanor had taught me that true elevation comes from lifting others, from protecting what matters, from understanding that some legacies are built on foundations stronger than mere ambition. The night deepened over Millbrook as our team finally prepared to leave. But the weight of Eleanor's records, the depth of her planning, and the scope of her vision would light our way forward. She had given us more than evidence against our opponents. She had given us purpose. 1 year later, autumn, leaves danced across the Harrison estate's restored courtyard as workers carefully positioned the final piece of the historic marker. The bronze plaque gleamed in the morning sun, telling the story of how this place had served as a beacon of hope for those seeking freedom on the Underground Railroad. The dedication ceremony starts in an hour, Madison reminded me, tablet in hand as she coordinated last-minute details. Governor's already here, the national press is setting up, and the Historical Society board is practically vibrating with excitement. I adjusted Eleanor's ruby necklace, now a symbol not just of inheritance but of transformation. The past year had reshaped Millbrook in ways even my grandmother might not have imagined. Thomas Wright approached, architectural plans tucked under his arm. Final inspections complete. The restoration team found one last hidden chamber yesterday, complete with original documentation from the Underground Railroad conductors. Each discovery had added layers to the estate's significance, turning what could have been another soulless luxury development into a living museum of American history. The contrast with Rebecca Palmer's original plans couldn't have been starker. Speaking of the Palmers, Madison glanced at her news alerts. Rebecca's sentencing is scheduled for next week. Prosecution's requesting maximum penalties for the fraud charges. The investigation had uncovered corruption extending far beyond Millbrook's borders. Rebecca's international money laundering network had implicated business leaders and politicians across 3 continents. Her fall from grace had triggered a domino effect that was still reverberating through corporate boardrooms. And Ryan? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Plea deal finalized yesterday, full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. He's agreed to serve as a witness in the ongoing investigations. Andrea joined us, legal documents in hand. Just finished. The paperwork for the Richmond Foundation's latest acquisition. You now own controlling interest in every historic property the Palmers tried to destroy over the years. But ownership wasn't the goal anymore. Each property was being carefully restored and repurposed: affordable housing, community centers, educational facilities. The very things Rebecca had dismissed as unprofitable were now breathing new life into Millbrook's neighborhoods. Miss Richmond, Sarah Martinez approached, digital recorder ready. Any comment on the rumors about Time Magazine's Person of the Year shortlist? Sources say your work in historical preservation and community development has caught their attention. Before I could respond, a familiar figure caught my eye. Aunt Diana stood at the estate's entrance, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. Emily, she began as I approached, I owe you an apology. When Eleanor passed, I thought, well, we all thought her quiet ways meant she'd lost her influence. We couldn't have been more wrong. The admission carried weight. Diana had been among those who'd initially supported Rebecca's vision for Millbrook, seeing only the surface glamour of promised prosperity. The town's transformation this past year, she continued, gesturing at the restored buildings and renewed community spirit. It's everything Eleanor always said was possible. A group of schoolchildren filed past, headed for the new educational center built in the estate's east wing. Their excited chatter about historical artifacts and preservation projects proved that Eleanor's vision had reached far beyond mere architectural salvation. James Sullivan arrived with our latest financial reports. Richmond Holdings' community investment model is being studied by business schools nationwide. They're calling it the Millbrook Method, proving that preservation and profit aren't mutually exclusive. The evidence was in the numbers. Property values had stabilized, local businesses were thriving, and tourism had increased dramatically since we'd begun highlighting Millbrook's historical significance. Your grandmother would be proud. Margaret appeared at my elbow, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Though I suspect she's not entirely surprised. She handed me a small package, another item from Eleanor's seemingly endless archive of carefully timed revelations. Inside, I found a photograph I'd never seen before. Young Eleanor standing with my mother in front of the Harrison estate, both smiling at something off camera. The inscription on the back read, "For Emily, when she understands that true justice isn't about destroying the old to build the new. It's about preserving what matters while creating space for what could be." A commotion at the gates drew our attention. Federal agents were escorting a handcuffed figure, one of Rebecca's. Former associates who'd violated witness protection by trying to access sealed Palmer Technologies documents. They found him attempting to delete backup servers, Detective Barnes reported. But every file he tried to erase, we already had copies of, thanks to your grandmother's meticulous record-keeping. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very secrets Rebecca and her father had tried to bury had become the foundation of Millbrook's renaissance. Andrea's phone buzzed with breaking news. Palmer Technologies' final assets have been auctioned, proceeds going to the victims' restitution fund. And the Harrison estate development loans? Madison asked. Restructured through Richmond Holdings, Andrea confirmed. Every contractor who got caught in Rebecca's schemes has been made whole. Thomas Wright's team had begun setting up for the dedication ceremony. The stage backdrop featured before and after photos showing the estate's transformation from neglected mansion to vibrant historical center. Governor's ready for the press conference, Madison checked her schedule. They're expecting questions about the new statewide historic preservation initiative. The legislation, inspired by Millbrook's example, would protect other historic properties from destructive development. Eleanor's influence extended far beyond our town's borders. A flash of expensive suits caught my attention. Ryan, accompanied by his lawyers, stood awkwardly at the periphery of the gathering crowd. His once confident posture now carried the weight of consequences. He's not staying, Madison assured me. Part of his plea agreement requires documenting how the Harrison estate plans were altered to hide Rebecca's illegal activities. I watched him photograph architectural details that would serve as evidence in upcoming trials. His expertise, once used to enable corruption, now helped expose it. Sometimes, Margaret mused, following my gaze, the best revenge isn't in destroying your enemies, but in using their own choices to illuminate truth. The ceremony began as autumn sunlight filtered through restored stained glass windows. Each speaker highlighted different aspects of the estate's significance: historical, architectural, cultural. But the underlying theme remained constant: preservation as a path to progress. From my seat on stage, I could see faces in the crowd that told Millbrook's story. Former Palmer Technologies employees now working in community development. Local business owners whose profits had increased with heritage tourism. Families living in restored historic buildings that Rebecca would have demolished. Sarah Martinez's latest article appeared on phones throughout the audience. Millbrook's Renaissance: How Historical Preservation Defeated Corporate Greed. But this wasn't really about defeat. It was about transformation, of buildings, of communities, of legacies. Eleanor had understood that true power lies not in destroying what others build, but in preserving what matters while creating space for growth. As I rose to deliver my speech, the ruby necklace caught the light. Its glow reminded me of everything Eleanor had taught me about patience, purpose, and the quiet strength of choosing preservation over destruction. A year ago, I began, this estate stood at a crossroads. One path led to destruction disguised as progress. The other, the words flowed naturally, telling not just the Harrison estate's story, but Millbrook's journey from threatened heritage to vibrant future. Every face in the crowd reflected understanding. This wasn't the end of a scandal, but the beginning of a legacy. Somewhere, I knew, Eleanor was watching. Not surprised by Rebecca's fall or Ryan's betrayal, but pleased that her careful planning had created something lasting from their destructive ambitions. The autumn breeze carried the sound of children's laughter from the educational center, a reminder that every preserved building, every protected story, shaped future generations' understanding of what matters. This was Eleanor's true revenge, not in destroying those who threatened what she valued, but in transforming their destructive impulses into foundations for something meaningful. And as the dedication ceremony concluded, As Millbrook's historic district glowed in the autumn light, I understood finally what Eleanor had known all along. Some fortunes are built not on tearing down the past, but on protecting it for the future. The ruby necklace caught the sun one last time, its fire a promise that some legacies burn brightest when they light the way forward. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.